On behalf of our Board of Trustees, I thank all of our distinguished guests for their warm greetings and presentations of these items that are significant in the life of this institution's past, present, and future. Our final presenter is here today to pay tribute to his former dean at the University of the South, our new president, Rob Pearigen. It's a privilege to introduce to you Jon Meacham, a nationally acclaimed historian whose biography of the United States president for whom this city is named, Andrew Jackson, won the Pulitzer Prize in 2009. Mr. Meacham is co-anchor of Need to Know, a national public affairs program broadcast weekly on PBS, former editor of Newsweek magazine, and author of 3 New York Times bestsellers. He's also the editor of the book Voices in Our Blood, a collection of writings about the civil rights movement in the 1960s, which was chosen this year as the inaugural freshman reading assignment at Millsaps. You'll find a biographical sketch of Mr. Meacham in your program. He has already made a major contribution to this inaugural celebration by participation yesterday in the forum on Millsaps and the Civil Rights Movement, a 50-year retrospective. We look forward to his address on liberal arts education in the global age.
Thank you very much. I am grateful for your ecumenical nature by having me. I am an Episcopalian, which is the first grace of yours to allow me here. I am a graduate of the University of the South, so that's 2. And I am less impressed, at least, because I suspect the reason I'm here is that I'm a Mississippian by marriage. And so the wisest decision I ever made came from associating myself with an institution of Mississippi, my wife. And I think we're going to find that the wisest decision Rob Pearigen ever made, and that you ever made, was to associate him with you. For many of us here today, this is a grand and glorious, yet somewhat bittersweet occasion. I've known Phoebe and Rob Pearigen for nearly a quarter of a century. I remember when Carolyn and Wesley were born. My family and theirs have in company passed Christmases and Easters and summers together on a Tennessee mountaintop that's dear to all of us and to many of you. So to the Millsaps community and to Jackson and to Mississippi, I'm compelled to say, well done. You are fortunate in your new president, and he is fortunate in you. You could not be in better hands. The hands of a man of spirit and of strength, a man of uncommon wisdom and of exceptional heart, a man of integrity and of grace. And the fact that you've appointed Rob to this post as the price of having the lovely, kind, and brilliant Phoebe in your midst is a secret that will be safe with me. Like Rob, I am a child of the liberal arts. I, with him, believe in the educational mission of Millsaps. And to borrow a phrase from my religious tradition, I believe in it with all my heart and with all my soul and with all my mind. One of the wonderful things about the liberal arts is that they afford us a view of the world and worlds beyond the immediate sensory one that informs us and delights us. That was Horace's definition of poetry, to delight and to instruct. I'd like to take our few moments together this morning to suggest an even larger possible role for the liberal arts. It's this. I believe they offer, in a formulation from the poet and novelist Robert Penn Warren, a kind of redemption from what Warren called the accidents, evils, and errors of life and of our lives. Redemption is the key idea here. Sorry, Bishop. I'm treading on her ground. Redemption in the sense of rescue and ransom from injustice, from discredited ideas, and from the fundamental selfishness that afflicts us all. There's an old story about a minister from one denomination who had grown up very close to a man who became an active layman in a different denomination. And after many years, they came together to discuss their different faiths and how their lives had turned out. And it was a wonderful lesson in tolerance and mutual understanding. And as they parted, the minister said, "You know, we do both worship the same God. You in your way and I in his." So we have a bit of work to do. And I think the liberal arts is part of that work. The roots of what we think of as the liberal arts can be found in Hindu culture. It's useful to note that in the West, what we think of as the liberal arts has an ancestry that is both pagan and Christian. Cicero defined a liberal education as the study of geometry, literature, and St. Augustine in the medieval Roman Church worked in a similar vein, finding their mission statement, so to speak, in 2 Timothy, which hoped that education would make the man of God perfect, furnished to every good work. I think we may agree in broad terms on this definition. The liberal arts are those disciplines that help introduce the student to what Matthew Arnold described as the best that has been thought and said in the world, and that train the mind to think clearly, respecting the force of fact and reason. From mathematics to Mozart, from the basics of physics to political history, from Thucydides to Toni Morrison, from really anything to anything else. The liberal arts offer us a way of seeing, knowing, and thinking about the affairs of this world and perhaps those of the next. And the affairs of this world, of the early 21st century, are global in nature. It seems a cliche to even point it out. Cliches are cliches for a reason. It's because they're true. Borders have not mattered so little since the first gazelle loped across the first savanna. As Americans, we face fundamental economic, political, and moral challenges. We must remain innovative and competitive, for experience tells us that broad shared prosperity is crucial to the maintenance of democracy. Politically, we are in the midst of a great partisan struggle in which a class of provocateurs on the internet and on cable television and in the shadows appear to have more invested in the perpetuation of conflict than in the resolution of problems. Morally, we face the question of whether the great achievement of the last century, the building of a sturdy, dependable middle class that benefited from both private enterprise and government investment, is to be sustained or discarded. Now, it is true that every generation tends to think of itself as particularly challenged or under siege. Humankind seems to be forever coping with crisis. I would strike the seams. Humankind is forever coping with crisis. And it will, until what your native son, William Faulkner, called the last red and dying evening. Southerners know this in their bones. Mississippians feel history keenly, because to you, as Faulkner noted elsewhere, the past is never dead. It isn't even past. On the streets of this city, and in places all over the state, a half-century ago, courageous men and women, black and white, confronted the worst of hatred and violence, and in so doing, found the best in themselves. It is to those who marched and fought and died for an end to Jim Crow that we will be forever grateful. Millsaps is part of that legacy, an important part. Preserve that story, tell it, teach it well. So many of the great universal perils and promises find vivid expression right here in this spot. This is an institution founded in the tradition of John Wesley, a divine who believed in the value of education and in the centrality of the individual. This is an institution sitting in the heart of a state in a region where, the day before yesterday, Americans were forced to stand up and be counted in the struggle to live up to the full implications of the Jeffersonian promise that all men are created equal. This is an institution devoted to the study of ideas that have shaped this nation and the world in this, an hour in which the peoples and nations have never been so intimately connected and yet remain forever divided by differences of birth and of faith. The role, then, of the liberal arts that you teach here in this global age cannot be overstated. Without the kind of education that you offer here, without being the kind of institution that you are and that under Rob you will continue to be, without the transmission of the values of free inquiry, critical thinking, the sanctity of the individual, and the obligation to love one's neighbor, we're going to lose more than our economic way. We're going to lose our way entirely. So what to do? The liberally educated person in the America of 2010 and 2011 and 2012 and on should know certain facts. You cannot appreciate the epic series of events and the struggle for power between rulers and the ruled, a struggle that plays out even now, even here, that shaped the world, without knowing about Magna Carta and the English common law, of which we are the heirs and whose principles, after centuries of strife and bloodshed, led to the end of Jim Crow and ultimately to the election of the 44th President of the United States. That a line runs from Runnymede in 1215 to a presidential contest in 2008 on a continent then 2 centuries away from even being discovered by the Western European powers is worth knowing. And not just to impress people, not just to feel superior, not just to try to turn a buck or two on Jeopardy. Knowing the history of freedom, and liberal in the sense of which we are speaking in its definition as free, is not only illuminating, but enabling. Now, because a person understands the past in all its glory and grandeur, its horror and its injustice, because they understand that history, they understand that line, they understand what Franklin Roosevelt said, that the path of civilization, while never straight, is essentially upward. Upward to what his friend Winston Churchill called the sunlit uplands of happiness and of peace. To know what's come before and to know how to think about seemingly disparate and distant events in relations to one's own time is to be armed against despair. For if the men and women of the past, with all their flaws and limitations and ambitions and appetites, could press on through ignorance and superstition, racism and sexism, selfishness and greed, to form a more perfect union, then with God's help, we can too. And we can then leave the world, the union, a better place than we found it. Now, there's plenty of debate, how could there not be, about the content of a liberal education. No doubt some of you may find the allusions I've made too Western, possibly even too male, and there's perennial tension about what should be taught. I welcome the work of the last 3 decades or so, we all should, decades in which the voices of the previously silenced or marginalized have at last been given something of their due. From women to African Americans to Native Americans, we are at long last addressing millennia, not centuries, millennia of exclusion. We are, in other words, redeeming the sins and omissions of the past. That is work that must go on and work that I know Rob Pearigen believes in deeply. A liberal education is about living a good life, not the good life. A life of doing good and saying your prayers and helping the needy and cherishing your children and reading good books, of knocking on doors for candidates you believe in, of emailing your congressman, of becoming a congressman, come to that. Mississippi's Shelby Foote, the historian and novelist, once told Walker Percy that he believed the purpose of writing was to teach people how to see. To teach people how to see. That, too, is the function of the liberal arts. For once we learn to see, even if it is through a glass darkly, then whole universes open up. We have been taught that we shall know the truth, and the truth shall set us free. But first we must see that truth. Only then can we know it. On this day of beginnings and of affirmations, may all of us celebrate and remember and support the work you are about and that President Pearigen loves so dearly. The work to see, to know, to become free. There's no greater task, there's no greater joy, and there's no greater man than your new president to point the way.